that gives permission to say, okay, I get where some of this is useful, and I can use that and know that, like, I'm not being told this is how I have to do things. This is something that we can understand to just be a means of growing and in our differentiation. So.
One thing about the CP experience here, anyway, is I mentioned it earlier during our talk about your sermon, was this understanding of isolationism, especially working in the woods. A lot of those people are extremely, or they feel extremely isolated. And I think that's something a lot of people in my generation, probably other generations, would resonate with a lot as we continue to live into this social media age, where isolation is just a way bigger problem than it probably has been in generations past. I think that's more a sign of the times than a sign of generation differences. But this has been a really interesting place to observe isolation.
So I got a question about that. Do you think that your generation, at least the people that you know of your age, is there a longing for more human-to-human contact, or is that a fear and you feel safe, or members of your generation feel safe?
Yeah.
Both.
Both? You think
Yeah.
both?
I think both.
So, one of the fastest growing websites in the last few years is Reddit. And basically it's a massive structure of online communities. I don't know if it's face-to-face contact, but it is people pushing against isolationism. And a lot of those people wouldn't really feel comfortable with face-to-face contact. However, I still feel like there's a really big need and a really big desire for more human community. And you're seeing that with, as I've been working on this big project I'm working on, there's this group called WeWork who does cooperative workspaces. They've grown now and started to do something called We Live as well, in which people will move into basically a giant building. They have community kitchens where they can come together, or the laundry room will have like a ping pong table in it, so that when people are doing laundry, it forces people to come together more, and people are flocking to these places.
Do you think it forces them or creates
Your
space for them
generation is flocking to these
I'd
places.
say people in my generation, I think there's something to be said for people in this generation flocking to a similar type of place. This is a similar type of place
Yeah, right.
to We
Yeah.
Live. I think it's a sign of the times more than a generational thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But our generation is the ones that have to maybe figure out a way to fix some of that. And I'm seeing co-living as one of those opportunities in our age that people are moving towards. And also, it's cheaper to co-live with other people.
Yeah.
And we can't afford houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
because of said debt, yeah.
that has been one of the things
The
about
burbs
your
are not the dream.
Right, is the American dream has changed for your generation, that you work hard, you get
Being debt-free
you get
is our
a half
dream.
acre
Yeah,
and
for
a
real.
house.
Yeah,
Gosh, if we-
being without debt is our dream, and if that means living with less, we're happy with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
If
would
you ask
say
any millennial,
I would be willing to make that generalization
Yeah.
about millennials.
If you ask any millennial, what would you do with if you won the lottery, what would you do? I bet the first thing out of their mouth would be pay off my debt.
Student loans.
Student loan debt.
And the
And
second
then-
thing would be the folks who feel like they know the investment market enough that they
Yeah,
could
it's
somehow like.
probably-
I'm going to
make
give
the
it to a
game.
guy after that.
I feel yeah.
Yeah.
Or like I'll give it to a guy, or I'll save it for my kids so that they so I can pay for their education. And I do think that I can't count how many times I've said, man, I wish I could live, like somewhat jokingly, but like in a commune with my friends or be closer to my friends, because I think this generation, and especially even the generations before us, have lost the we don't live in the places that we grew up. Our parents aren't down the road anymore. Our cousins don't live nearby. That's like really weird for us, and not weird, but it's not normal for that to happen. So relationships, building relationships through friendship is like a really big deal. But I do think that, yes, we want to be in community with each other, but we also value community that can be formed through social media, which
Yeah.
I don't know if other, like, for me, I don't use Reddit, but I really enjoy Instagram and feel like I have formed community there with people who I've actually, like, never met face to face, but I kind of feel like I know them, which is weird. Like, it kind of is a little embarrassing to, like, say that out loud, but...
No, like, I frequent a blog for the Washington Redskins,
Uh-huh.
and I've never met any of the people on this blog, and yet, like, I know who they are and what they think about stuff, and, like, I remember one really active person on the blog died, and they had, like, a eulogy for him as a blog post, and, like, there were, like, 1,000 comments about this guy and about, in this community, just pouring out love in this place, that most of these people never met this guy face to face,
Mhm.
ever. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This
Yes.
is incredible.
Yeah, it's just really odd. But, I mean, not in a bad way, it's just
Yeah.
new. New.
There's desire for both, like
Yeah.
Heather
Okay.
said.
Do you see anything in the CPE experience that helps in forming community?
Yeah, I think the ability to listen and the permission, for me, learning how to listen and the permission to ask curious questions has really changed, I think, the way that I'll create community in my own life and in the church. I think,
And
Our-
BFST.
huh?
And BFST.
Well,
Yes.
family systems.
It's like, what? Best
Acronyms
friends.
are a thing we do
like-
too.
Maybe not all of us. I really struggled on that one.
I thought it's something all of our generation
Yeah.
did.
No, I'm sure it is.
But that's really important in sort of that community making to understand that, how those things work.
Mm-hmm. How your past creates who you are in the present.
Yeah, and also
It shapes and
understanding
forms
how to
it.
be a change maker in a system.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Which are.
Or at least not a, like, continuer of the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think our generation is realizing, because we are behind screens so much, how important it is to actually learn to, like, listen to someone and have hard conversations that aren't just
That are on
comments back
Facebook
and forth.
comment walls.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
I don't think we were really, like, taught that, so being given the skills here.
I know the generation after or before us wasn't taught that.
Older generations.
We're just really confused about all of that.
Those older generations and their Facebooks.
That's not how this works.
That's not how this
Fake news. It's the Washington Post.
So
Get
what
your Breitbart off of here.
So what do you think is, yeah, Facebook, you know, it's interesting.
Well,
My thing about Facebook is that, you know, the analytics are supposed to be so good that they know my likes better than I do, and my dislikes better than I do. But I keep getting all of these things on there for politicians I will never vote for.
It's because they know you're a pastor.
Causes I will never support, and cars I will never buy.
So there was a thing going around this weekend, actually, or maybe it was this past week, and since I was home, I got to see it
But
work.
learn
So I
all
was on
about
Facebook.
Cambridge Analytica more and more.
Cambridge Analytica. If you go in the settings on Facebook, you can see for the advertising what they predict you are based on what you type and what you say.
Mhm.
I found it fascinating that I'm a moderate African American based on what I say. Like, so,
What?
yeah, it's nuts.
So they're really not that good.
No, they're really not.
But neither are we with our socially constructed
Yeah, it's
age groups.
It goes more into like the guessing based on the thoughts. But there's something else I was gonna say. I think it's when it comes back to me more cogently.
All right, well, let's think about another question while you think about that. So what about the CBA experience would be difficult or troubling, you think, to folks in your generation? What wouldn't be helpful, generally?
I think one thing, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think
wrong.
one thing we've each struggled with is kind of when we're doing our visitations, a little bit just the freedom in it. Does that make sense? Like the
Non-directive.
directiveness. Yeah.
I feel like kind of like the disciples being like, just tell us what to do.
Yeah, I think maybe Carl the least out of the the three of us, but I think Sean and I struggled
I'm
with
with
it. But sometimes Carl, I mean, I think we've all said like, oh man, we're gonna go over there and just like
It was, I remember the first couple weeks, I definitely had that feeling like all anybody's doing in the unit is like sitting down and watching Gunsmoke. So I sit down with them, and every time like a nurse walks by
You feel
or
guilty?
something, I feel like, oh my gosh, I have to like be talking to somebody,
Yeah,
and they're like, I'm watching Gunsmoke,
Yeah.
son.
yeah, like, don't talk right now.
Which is a religious experience for
Right.
some people of this generation.
It's funny you said that because I remember the one time I tried to sit down to watch Gunsmoke with them, someone came late to the group and they're like, I don't have anywhere to sit. And just looked at me. I'm like, all right, I got a chair for you. I'm just going to walk over here where no one is. And
Yeah. I think the permission to not achieve in the way that we see achievement being, like an output, like the fact that there's not an output for what we're doing some days when we're just literally watching Gunsmoke, is something that millennials will have difficulty
What's
with.
funny, we came in, or I remember my experience coming in when we had our conversation about whatever, if it was an interview or meeting before it started, was that this was not about checking boxes off while we were here.
Yeah.
And that,
Did that raise anxiety?
a little bit, because I felt unsure of how to, like, quantify or qualify what was happening. And so, and I think that's something that may be prevalent in this generation. I imagine it's because we were taught that there's something you have to have. You have to have a degree.
Output.
You have to have these grades. You have to have this accomplishment to be able to succeed. And so, and while being in a system that still sometimes uses that, you have to accomplish all these things before you can get ordained. You have to accomplish all these things. So it kind of felt like when I was student teaching and first went into the schools, it was like I have all this really good, ideal way to teach people, and this test that I have to teach to is all about what year did this happen. It felt like it didn't connect well. And so I think that was, I mean, I'm sure you all heard me talk about it for months, and I probably still do. That was a very large struggle for me to be able to say, not only like, yes, I hear that it's okay to just be here, but really, is it okay that I'm just kind of here?
Here, right, yeah. Just
Yeah.
lurking.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I hear you. Yeah. So the idea of, and particularly, I guess, true in the woods. You've all visited folks in the independent living section,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
What was the difference, do you think?
The
More than the
cues-
obvious of cognitive.
Sure. Almost even just the social cues that I typically rely on and have learned of, like, this is how I know a conversation is fruitful. This is how I know that it's not fruitful. Pretty much like, and it's not about me saying something and like teaching to someone else. That's not what I mean by fruit. But like the moments where you find that, okay, we've connected on something and we can talk about this, is easier because like at least I can point to, well, that was a good conversation. We were able to talk and both brought up things and we were able to listen to one another. In the woods, the one struggle was the repetition. And so I want to say like, well, yes, I heard that, but then it's like, what does that actually mean in the scope of our relationship? Is that actually helpful? When I think about the validation theory, like, is it a good conversation if I say, sure, there's an elevator over that way, we'll go look for it? Or your home is here now. Like, is that a good conversation, or am I harming this somehow? I think that uncertainty in the woods was a struggle, is a struggle still.
So what would you say to future CPE educators about supervising people who identify as being of the millennial generation? What would you, since most of us are not millennials, What would you think an educator needs to know?
One thing that you've done that I've really appreciated is you haven't drawn attention to it unless it comes up. That's just been really helpful, I think, for our relationship building, because I think there's a perception that when somebody brings it up, they've already created a false narrative in their head about who we are. And so it's really helpful just to build the relationship first before that.
To get to be people together.
Yeah,
instead of-
unless it's brought up naturally, it's not something to bring up yourself and say, as a millennial, how do you feel about this, or something like that. Like what we're doing today.
Like what we're doing today.
You waited till the very last month of work to do that, so we're a lot more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also to that, you've never really brought up like our age differences. Like you've never said like, well, you guys are so young, or
We're all aware of it.
yeah, like it doesn't need to be called to our attention. And then the other thing is you haven't like what I experience at work a lot that I call being dad. Like you don't like talk down to us and say, well, in my day, or like I'm so wise, and I've had so much more experience
You'll
than
learn
you.
this
You'll
as you
learn,
go.
yeah. You don't do any of that, which I think other CPE or educators, or just
educators in general.
anybody that works with younger people should never try to dad or mom them.
Yeah, not
And you don't do that, so it's been helpful.
I think back to the verbatim, I just wrote it one. How do you describe the relationship? And I think the example says, is it equal and separate and open? I think you've done a good job of embodying that. I think it's really, it seems in my life experience, and hear it from other folks sometimes too, that like the perception that we're not equal, that we are supposed to be in a position where we are learning from the older generations at a consistent pace, when it's much more fruitful when we get the permission to just learn from each other, because it takes the pressure of, I imagine, to the younger generation, if I have to be teaching you something at every time, but it also takes the pressure off of like, why do I feel like you're trying to tell me what to do versus work with me? So I've appreciated that part, and would recommend that to future educators, the willingness to just come in as an equal, that while yes, there's the experience is different, and the scope of this community, and imagine for how CPE works in other places, we are all chaplains. Had you told us that we don't have to introduce ourselves as chaplain interns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just, I guess what we're all trying to say is just like striving to treat them as equals. I think that's what any generation would want, is to be seen as what we are. We're all clergy. We've all been to seminary. We've all done ministry. And that might not be the case for every person that goes into CPE. But I was really thankful for that. You did a really good job of being like more of a mentor and a facilitator rather than somebody that comes and preaches at us every week. Or not that I thought that's what CPE
no pun intended
was.
on Wednesdays,
Yeah.
but
No, I'm actually like really sad. I was like, oh, you guys should come to chapel on Wednesdays when you're not. It's just a good way to be fed, anyways. But that's an aside.
What would you imagine the dynamic of this group being if there was a fourth member? Well, let's go with a fourth member who was a baby boomer. How would that have changed
It depends on
the
the boomer.
dynamic?
I think it depends on the person.
Okay.
are we making
I don't know.
stereotypical boomer?
So
Or
my father-in-law is a baby boomer who is clergy, and he is not supervisor. He's a chaplain at a place like this. He would drive me insane. But then again, just as millennials aren't something that's monolithic, neither are baby boomers.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the boomer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was saying, I try to think back to seminary when we had some classes with intergenerational,
yeah.
and I think it depended on the willingness to listen
Mhm.
versus the willingness as if coming in like, I have to teach these young folk
Yeah.
what the way is.
One of my closest friends at seminary was a 55-year-old super conservative guy. We get along splendidly, and we're able to have these sort of conversations, and he's open to having these sort of conversations, and never felt like he was looking down on any of us for age at all, except to make fun, as
Right.
friends do
Yeah.
sometimes.
When you have relationships.
When you have
Yeah.
relationships, you can totally poke fun at the age difference or like.
But I mean, he's in Pennsylvania, and I got a call from him last week, and we talked about our ministries for over an hour, and what's going on.
Yeah, if I think of like, if we had a boomer like Linda, like that would be awesome. Or like even some of the people that I've encountered here, like Virginia Jones, if she was going through this with it, I don't know if she's a boomer, she's probably older, I don't know. But it would be great. But it really just depends on the person.
I think if expectations were laid out at the beginning, especially if the CP supervisor sensed some sort of tension behind that, or false narrative behind that. Like I could have all sorts of false narratives about Heather because she's female clergy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in some ways, this group, your group, has been unusual in that you're all the same generation, you're all the same denomination, and you knew each other
Mm-hmm.
prior to starting this, which is not typical. And so that presents some good things. I mean, some good things come out of that, and that you were, I guess, more trusting of one another off to start with. There's probably some negatives to that too, in that sometimes the tension can bear fruit within a group. If nothing else, you learn how to process, the tension and conflict and the differences and all of those kinds of things. So you really did not get that piece out of this program. So what would you imagine this group, if a fourth member was coming and they were just finishing their first year of seminary?
If they came to our group
If they came
and they
to our
just
group.
finished their
Yeah.
first, I wish it was a girl.
Can it be a girl for this
Oh, it could be a girl for this.
Or a woman.
Congratulations, Heather.
I got myself a girl. I don't know if they were just finished seminary. Let me think. I know people that just finished seminary.
First year of seminary.
First year.
First year of
That's
seminary.
They're in
So like,
seminary.
That's
like
a
my
dangerous
sister.
Yeah.
Maybe not my sister, but
You said you wanted a girl.
I did. I don't want her. I'm just kidding. I love her, but
But for real.
do CPE with her. Could you imagine doing CPE with a sibling?
No.
That should not be allowed. Anyways,
I don't think it is.
okay,
Too.
good.
Only aboard your
If a first year seminary student came and had to be in our group,
There's still different types of first year seminary students, even if we're talking same age.
Yeah,
same,
there's the
same
meme-worthy
everything.
first year seminary.
it would really, all this stuff that we talked about, like not like momming or dadding someone, it would be really hard to do that. I'd be like, listen, have you considered getting another degree with your seminary degree? How much debt are you incurring right now? It would be so hard not to do that.
Cherish this time. Cherish it.
So, you would want somebody to benefit from your experience.
That's right. I would totally mom someone. I'd be like, listen to me. You should probably get that dual degree.
Interesting.
Yeah, that dual degree only cost us another $20,000.
I know, my dual degree.
So you might want it, but,
But
again.
if you're a deacon,
So-
you should consider it.
When I was in seminary, I got to help one week with scholarship applicants and trying to interview them and figure things out. And I remember there was one individual who came who debatably wasn't ready for seminary. The academic work done before didn't seem like it really prepped that person for being in a higher level of education. And I remember talking with someone after the interview, and they said, well, he'll get accepted here, but probably won't get a scholarship. And it seems like what a disservice that would be to let someone come in and spend at least a couple grand knowing that they're probably not ready to be here. And so that's what runs through my head when I think of first year seminarians, like where along the scope are they?
Are they just seminarians, or do they have a church on the side?
Yeah, it's not a
because that's-
generational thing. It's just that where are they on their journey?
But if I'm just thinking about the CPE experience and what it would offer a first year seminarian before, like if we think about like if we had this experience with people like us before we had gone into the ministry, Carl aside, since you had
Sort
a
of.
church,
Elder
but like
missionary.
how do you think it would have benefited us? I would have been able to handle conflict a lot better.
I think
That
I
would have
think
been
it would give
so
a lot of
helpful.
opportunity for somebody to be able to contextualize a lot of what they're learning better if they heard from somebody different than them. Yeah.
I think it would equip people to hear different points of view.
Mhm.
And that would be really important when we start studying scripture, like thinking of the mind-blown moments of walking through the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament and the New Testament, and the perspectives that people would bring up and be like, well, that's stupid. But if you're already have walked through, okay, let me think about what this person's gone through that may have led them to this, like that changes how you wrestle with that. So.
And it's always good to be younger and have connections with a few older, younger clergy.
Older, younger clergy. Not the older person.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I appreciate you, your sharing and
Obviously, we like to talk about ourselves. So.
answering.
Me.
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 That's where we came from, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about us.
Well, hopefully that's helpful. Are
Yeah,
you just going
I-
to show our video?
Hmm?
Are you just going to show our video?
He's gonna take our best quotes, he's gonna watch over it and pour over the data, and put it into the Facebook machine and see what they think we
Into
are.
the Facebook.